You've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. What incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer?
Hello, I'm Mustafa Ahmed.
And I'm Chris Covell.
Welcome back to YouX, the podcast at the intersection of research, design, and development. We're introducing a new series called YouX Freestyle, where we jump on a call together and discuss new UX topics that's on our minds. Chris, how do you think the first episode went?
Yeah, no, I think it was a lot of fun. Yeah, in this episode, we touched on a lot of, I think, very interesting topics. We started off talking about empathy and maybe why I'm not happy with the term, kind of a hot take. And then we moved on to talking about design thinking, having businesses be experience led. So, no, I'm happy and excited to do more of these UX freestyles where we just jump on the call and have an informal discussion and see where the conversation goes. It's kind of an adventure.
Yeah, totally agree. I hope you all enjoy the episode.
Welcome to UX, the global podcast at the intersection of research, design, and development. Sit back and listen as your hosts explore the ever-evolving world of user experience. And now, Chris Covell and Mustafa Ahmed.
Okay, welcome everyone again to another episode of UX. Mustafa, how's it going today?
Good, Chris. How are things with you?
Things are fine. Today should be, I think, a fun one. So the idea of this episode came up, I think, recently for me because again, this is going to be a little bit of a hot take here, but I think I'm getting to a point where we hear about empathy. I think empathy is one of the first concepts that a lot of people are taught or hear about when they encounter UX and designs, methodologies and principles. And I think for a while now, I've kind of had a little bit of a problem with the word and the concept. But more recently, I've gotten to a point where I actually think it's negatively affecting the field because I think that it sends maybe the wrong message to people who are outside of the discipline. And I think that we may want to refocus a little bit or at least maybe change the language slightly. But I think I'm still kind of working through it. But I know that this one might be fun, too, because I know you're a fan of using empathy and use it and think that it's actually the right term. So,
yeah, I mean, well, I guess, like you said, it's one of the first steps of design thinking. It's something that anyone that gets into this research and design space tends to either pick up or is taught. And for me, I tend to see it as a very crucial element in how you go about solving problems, right? The example I constantly use when trying to explain what empathy is and how and why we need it so much is that if you're making a product for a specific group, let's say you're making it for young women in their 20s, but the team that's coming up with these ideas are a bunch of 50-year-old men.
Are you and me?
Or you and me, right? We don't know what their challenges, what their problems, what their pain points, what their customer journey is going to be like until we actually sit and really try to understand and empathize, either through the cognitive empathy or through just the emotional empathy. And until we do that, we're just coming up with a product or a service that's purely based on gut feeling and assumptions, right? Which is
or what you as the product designer would want, right? Instead of what your population that you're designing for would want.
Exactly. Is essentially a product that's destined to fail, right? So that's why I've always championed empathizing. I've always championed really trying to understand the customer better and making people realize that you are not the customer to begin with. So why even bother trying to push your gut assumptions unless they're backed by some sort of data or research?
So you're not going to get any disagreements from me in terms of the actual practice of empathy. Yep, all that is I think is spot on, and I would totally agree with. I mean, I think that we want to make sure that throughout the entire stage, especially up front, but throughout the entire stage of the development cycle, we want to be inputting customer data, being experimental, going out and seeing if our assumptions are good or if they're bad, if they need to be tweaked, if they need to be completely radically changed. I mean, this is all for the good, and it's all, I think, the backbone to some degree of human-centered design. And this might be, and I think this is where we might get into the disagreement here is, and it might just be a small semantical point, because when I think of empathy, and I think when you go and you look it up in the dictionary, it's very much so. There's at least for me two main kinds of empathy. You mentioned them already, which is an emotional empathy and cognitive empathy. And emotional empathy to me seems almost like sympathy. And I think a lot of times if you hear people when they say just in regular everyday life, if when they say empathy, it can be the cognitive kind that I think we're talking about when it comes to design, but it also could mean the emotional kind, which can be also I think is synonymous with say sympathy. So I think that is a confusion immediately, right? Especially people who don't do design thinking, don't practice it, don't practice and follow human-centered design principles. When they hear empathy, they could immediately think sympathy, and I think that gives the wrong impression too. But even further than that, to me, when I hear empathize, or when I think of empathizing, it seems very singular, meaning you really can't. It's actually impossible, just by the meaning of the word, to empathize with a population of people, right? So when I hear empathy, what we do as researchers and designers and UXers is empathize. The image that comes to mind for me is an individual, a person, and getting a sense and understanding of their needs and what motivates them and what they do on a day-to-day basis, and really immersive understanding. But that's not really what it is that we do, right? We want to get a sense of what John, let's just say, is doing and his thoughts and his feelings, but also Jill and also Stephen and also everyone in that population. And we don't need to interview every single person to get a sense, but to some degree, empathy and looking at trends and seeing trends pop up, I feel like they're not the same kind of thing. And I feel like when we keep talking about empathy, it's a misleading term, and I think is adding to a misunderstanding within UX when it comes to how it's practiced within businesses, right? So for me, it's like I'd rather it be changed to something like customer understanding or study, because I feel like that's really what it is we do is we study the population and understand it in all of its nuances, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting take. I see where you find the issues with just the term empathy and where it's kind of being misunderstood. Where the way I see it is that I don't see the sympathizing part as a bad thing, right? I get where you're coming from in terms of why it can seem unnecessary, and why really what we do is really understanding the customer. But I see it more from a more, I guess, a broader lens, if you will. I see it from the fact that if we're able to really empathize, be it cognitive or emotional, and in fact, if we are able to do it emotionally, it helps create a bit more of an attachment or a emotional kind of evidence that comes forward that this is really the kind of problem that we should be solving, right? Because, I mean, we as humans were driven by many different things. We're motivated by many different factors, be it money, be it power, be it influence, but also sometimes by emotion itself, right? And that if we're able to really understand who the customer is and what pain points and struggles and emotions they go through, we're able to then also create this sense of buy-in from an emotional sense as well, right? Because just on understanding the customer pain points and validating that, yes, this is, the area we should focus on, could just translate as monetary motivation, right? That this is where we're going to make the most amount of money if we release a product or service that addresses these pain points.
Well, right. That's what I mean when it says the value of the product is wrapped up in its ability to satisfy like something a human want or desire or need or problem, right?
Right.
That's how you increase the value of a product, and then ultimately the bottom line, the bottom line.
Right, but I think there's something much larger here at play, and that's if we're able to really connect on more for a pure emotional level, we're able to then use that to.
Let me ask you about this. Do you mean when we as designers can connect on an emotional level with our users, or do you mean the business connecting with those emotions, like the stakeholders, or is it everybody together?
I think it's everybody. Just because we've seen a lot of successful advertising and marketing campaigns that really play to the emotional aspect, right? Yes, the product is geared to those pain points that they've understood through empathizing.
Well, a need and a want is kind of an emotional urge, is it not? Right? It can be looked at it that way. Like if I want something, I'm not really. It can be like a thought, but it does kind of come out from a place that I don't sometimes truly understand, right? It's just like I want it because I want it, and then I kind of come up with a reason. But it isn't. I feel like the emotional getting those emotional desires, right? Desire is an emotion. So like if you're trying to find the desire in your population, or pain is an emotion, right? So if you're trying to find pain points, the understanding affect of your customers is extraordinarily important, right? I think my pushback though is when you say empathize, it's very parochial. It's very narrow. Like you're thinking about one person, and I feel like I feel like when you, especially when you're starting off and you're trying to understand your customers and their motivations, and also the landscape and the ecosystem that they exist in, you have to do it. You have to paint with a bit of a broader brush. So when you're painting with a broader brush, you're not empathizing. Technically, you're not. It's this kind of like collective empathy. But then when I hear collective empathy, my mind, like that kind of doesn't sound all that good. There's something wrong with it, No,
but I mean, for us to be able to generate those trends and figure out what is the customer journey or general pain points of a populace, you'd have to really empathize for that one individual and do that maybe 10 more times,
right?
To now come up.
Yeah.
right? Because
it's many.
Someone might have
it's not just one.
It's not just one.
It's not just one.
Of course not. I mean, you can't base your entire research off of one. That's as good as a stakeholder coming in saying with his gut feeling, I think this is going to work. It's the same. That's the same thing.
It's like basing everything that you do when it comes to design off what you want.
Exactly. Right. And so that's not going to work. I think it's more about, understanding thoroughly and from a, and trying to get really deep with what are those challenges, those pain points, that customer journey. How do people feel, say, think, and do in those moments, and then mapping it against, a dozen more folks that you would have interviewed to say that, okay, you know what, this is the general vibe, this is what majority feel, and that's the area we should focus in. Because someone might have a very emotional and very triggering or experience in one thing, but if that person is just 1 out of 12, then that's not maybe the area of focus, right? Because
exactly, that's less you don't have to prioritize that as highly. Exactly.
And ultimately, to deliver business value through design, we have to look at the biggest fish to target.
No, I think you're right. I think the magnitude makes sense, and I feel like that's why higher sample, running either qualitative or quantitative research studies with high samples actually is a good thing, because it allows you to prioritize, the pain points or the opportunity areas better, and it allows you to narrow focus on specific things that are coming up more so than not, and also tell that story, right? So it's not just you or your team saying we think that this is where we want to focus on. It's much more objective. I use that term carefully, but yeah, it's much more objective. Maybe my problem with it, Mustafa, because I feel like obviously you understand, the issue with it's not just one person, or it's not just like feeling what another person feels, or it's not just sympathizing with them and really wanting to help that one person because you feel their pain or you feel their struggles or this kind of thing. Because we're doing it in a little bit more of a impartial way, which is really important. I feel like, because the whole idea of empathizing is to remove bias, right? I mean, that's why we do it. We remove our own bias. That's the whole point. It may be like what I have an issue with is more of like it from a marketing point of view, to go back to maturity levels, right? So when we're trying to explain it to people and trying to get that buy-in and trying to get that seat at the table and elevate the practice and go from, middle management in, design, the top level designers only at middle management, and trying to get them to higher levels within the organization. So there's much more influence and much more impact, and things designers are brought in, earlier, and all the things that we want and feel like we hope to see the field mature into. I think leading with empathy and being that we're these, leading with empathy and being like our expertise is in empathy, I feel like can fall flat on people who haven't done it, who haven't been through the process and know what we're talking about when we think of when we say empathy, which is why I'm saying maybe a rebrand to something more, a little bit more like less like warm. And I think a lot of times we use the term empathy, and maybe you would disagree with this, but we use it because it's like a warm and fuzzy feeling. And, we want to make sure that we're caring for our users and use that more soft language, and I'm not opposed to thinking that we really care about our users. But when it comes to trying to mature the practice, and when it comes to trying to get buy-in and have people spend money on it, right? Which is, but let's be honest. You always have to make that justification when it comes to dollars and cents. Focusing on being like, we're the practitioners of empathy feels like it's partly why, maybe not the entire why, but it's partly why you get this, sometimes you get this, you get sometimes you get the notion that anybody can do UX or anybody can do design, and it's not really an expert field because empathy sounds so easy. I mean, it really means sometimes to some people, if you say like what we do is empathize, well, it just means like being a human being, like feeling another's pain or trying to understand what they're going through, right? It's a very human thing, but maybe what we mean by it's something a little bit more technical, which is understanding or going out and observing and collecting information and then looking for patterns based on to some degree, a methodological, rigorous way of collection and data analysis and reporting that gets lost when we just say empathy, right? I mean, would you say that what like a social scientist do when they go out and they make experiments and they try to understand trends and they try to understand behavior, are they empathizing? They're studying, right? They're studying people. And I feel like that's what we do too. I mean, I've been working as a researcher focusing on that research, focusing on going out and understanding people throughout every point of the life cycle. And I don't feel like what I'm doing is empathizing. I mean, if you want to take empathy and, bend it into this other thing that you were just talking about, which is like, making sure that we're understanding the journey and seeing the landscape and getting a sense of how people are interacting and who they are. Fine, we can bend it into that definition, but the definitions on the surface, just based on normal common use language, is not that. It's something else, which is why I'm not sure why it's ultimately positive for the field as we mature and as we progress. I would personally like to see it change to something more like study or, because it gives us a bit more credibility and a bit more like there's a bit more focus on competence than say, I don't know, more like warm and fuzzy feelings, which both matter. But, I think that the discipline itself is in a place where it needs to progress and it needs to get better and it needs to get into a position where it's treated more seriously, not just by people who do it. Because I think that people who do it know what empathy means. At least they'll learn what it means eventually when they start getting into the nitty gritty, hopefully, but
okay. That's, I don't necessarily agree as much just because I think it's a different issue if I had to just play along.
Sure.
Because I feel like a lot of different
which issue.
Like I don't think it's a term issue. I think it's maybe a lack of representation is the issue, right?
When you say, just so I know, when you say issue, what are you referring to?
What's holding us back in the field, right? And the thing with empathy, yeah. So I don't think, because if I had to really think about it, right, and start breaking down other different careers and just completely park everything that I've seen through pop culture of what other people in different careers do, it's very easy for me to downplay a lot of other different careers. Right? Oh, accounting, cool. You just make sure numbers line up from right to left, right? Oh, investigator, great. You're just gonna go crime scene and look for clues, right? How could you miss a blood stain, right? I think the same way you could just downplay a lot of different careers, right? But the reason why we don't do that is because of how well represented a lot of these careers are in pop culture, right? Whether it be it finance, be it physics, be it anything, right? And medicine and so on, right? So I think just because it's not as well represented as the rest, that's why the term itself just seems like something so easy to brush off, because I see merit in having such a simple and easy, warm and fuzzy kind of term like that, because it just means that we've always preached design thinking is something that everybody can do, right? And everybody should do. But that also means that what we do as UX researchers is not necessarily anything that anybody can do, right?
Well, that's going to be a point, I think, where we will disagree, because I don't know if we're full. I think we agree on the empathy thing. I think I just have a bit of an issue. I think it sends a different message than what it is we actually do. I think the label, it's a misnomer. I can understand why, like, to some degree that is right. Like, I can bend the empathy definition into what it is that we do. But when you say but the actual what empathy actually means, I think we're both in 100% agreement. But when you say design thinking anybody can do, I don't know if I'm with you. And I know that the place that we met, that was actually one of the tenets of the innovation lab, was that we were trying to spread design thinking across the entire organization. I have I think a hot take, but I feel like I have different opinions on that, because I do think that the design thinking, or whatever framework you want to talk about. So I think that Double Diamond and design thinking are basically doing the same kinds of things, which is like, if I was to break it down, it would be three main components, right? One is discovery, which is empathizing, but let's call it maybe now more studying or customer understanding. Like this, like you're discovering, you're sketching out what is. You're understanding the landscape, the ecosystem, pain points, the environment, what people are thinking, what people are feeling, and you can do that in many different ways. And it is difficult. It's empathy kind of sounds easy, but it's that part is not easy. We all know. No, and it takes a long time, and it takes honestly a lot of data. Then you move into the creation phase, which I think is creation and testing. So prototyping, if you want to talk in design thinking language, prototyping, and then usability testing, right, and iterating. So you're going back and forth, and then you get an MVP, and then you get the third phase, which is, I think, monitoring, right? Which is, it's this thing is out in the wild, and you're getting feedback, and it's more empathizing to some degree. It's more research. I don't know if everyone can do that. I don't know if everyone should do that. I feel like practitioners like you and I, researchers, designers, product managers, are specially skilled at knowing that product life cycle. And that's the life cycle that we should try to follow. It's never perfect in reality. You always have things that pop up. You got to pivot. You got to make concessions. You got to, work with stakeholders. You have deadlines. We all know the trials and tribulations that could happen. It's never a straight line. But I don't know. To me, that's not something that that sales teams do, right? Or lawyers. I mean, they're not following design thinking. I mean, tell me more what you think when you say everyone can do it.
Okay, cool. So the way I look at it is that it's definitely not like walking, right? That everyone can do just right off the bat. But it's more like driving. That everyone has the capacity to learn how to drive, but in order for you to be actually, given the thumbs up and stamped as an official driver, you first need to go to driving school, get your license, and now you're a driver. Now, even if you are a driver, you're still going to crash. You're still going to, get a few fines. You're still going to make some mistakes. You may only be ever good as driving a basic sedan, but then there are going to be some drivers who are going to be able to do Formula One races, right? So I think that.
But my question then, not to cut you off, but my question really quickly, it comes rushing in, which is, why does not everybody needs a license, do they?
I mean, if they want to actually say they're doing design thinking properly, then yeah, they need a license. You could do part of it, right? I mean, you could just understand how the let's say the ideating bit works, right? Okay, sure, I've attended a few, design thinking workshops and sessions as a stakeholder, and I saw how a workshop was run, and now maybe I could go back to my team and run a similar brainstorm workshop, right, with my team. But out of all of design thinking, I'm only doing one little sliver of the ideation component, right? Doesn't mean that I'm doing all of design thinking, but I am doing something out of it, right? Without having to get this license.
Maybe what I misinterpreted you when you said anyone can do design thinking. Do you mean anyone within the design space, or do you literally mean anyone in the company?
I mean literally anyone in the. But so okay, I don't mean the whole end to end.
I'm just trying. I'm trying to get a sense of why like a CMO would want to would care about design thinking. So like a chief marketing officer who's busy doing his marketing thing and focusing on campaigns and this kind of thing. What does design thinking have anything to do with him?
I mean, a marketing officer probably a lot, right? In terms of how do we want to, what are some great campaign ideas? Okay, let's do an ideation session. Cool. Okay, we've got some great, outputs out of it. Let's do some A/B testing, right? Let's put them together as some mock-up emailers and then send it out. So we've done the prototyping. Now let's test it out through A/B testing, right? Or another example I could give you for a marketer is, do we know how we're communicating this across, right? How can I connect? I don't know if you've noticed, but on TikTok, I've noticed this quite a bit. Every other Apple ad is it's an emoji ad, but it's of a person who explains and walks me through their daily life and struggle with their previous phone and the challenges they faced and the pain points they had and how they made the switch to the iPhone and how their life changed around, right? They play an emotional story to get me to convert from my Android to an iPhone. Right.
And they talk about I think a good marketing campaign to some degree talks about the problems and the needs that the design is solving. So like basically you start with, empathizing, or I would want to call customer understanding, but you start there and then you go all the way through. And then at the end, when you're getting your campaigns ready, you're focusing on the problems that you found, and that this product is solving, right? So it all kind of ties together.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm with you that the product strategy, so to speak, or the design strategy can touch many different aspects of the business, and it, this might be disparaging to some of the other aspects of the business, but it does seem to me to be the case that the design strategy and the product that's being built and shipped is probably the most important part of the business. Why? Because that's how you generate revenue mainly. It succeeds and fails based on, again, if we want to have the assumption, if the assumption is that where value lies, economic value is the ability for a product or service to solve a problem. If that's how that product or service gets value, if it's not some other way, like through labor or just the cost, whatever cost that you put onto it, it has everything to do with the needs that you discover when you're empathizing. Then I feel like, that should be the business strategy. And then all the other components of the business should be married or interacting with that design or product design strategy, right? But the product design strategy, I feel like the teams follow design thinking from hopefully from start to finish. That's the idea.
Yeah.
And it makes it more of a systematic process to innovate and to create things that people actually want and need. So talk to me more about why the people who are not product design on that product design team. And the crazy thing is that a lot of business don't even have product design teams, right?
Yeah.
why do people who are separate from that? Is it just because so that they can come into the product and know come into that life cycle and kind of know what to do and how to help? Because I'm still struggling why you would want to spread design thinking far and wide when not everybody in the business designs things.
Right. So I think if you look at it from an agile sense, right, where agile development and agile workflows calls upon having everybody involved in the project in the room together, even if you're, like in a banking example, from compliance, from fraud, from risk, from info security, you're not product developers. You're not, your day-to-day life does not involve working and developing on products that go out to the customer. But you play a role from your domain that has an impact on the final experience that goes out to customers. And if your contribution on that team is solely on just getting, a checkbox, to say that, yeah, this is compliance approved or info security approved or risk approved, without having any consideration for what that means for the customer experience, then you're just going to become one of those guys that nobody wants to deal with but has to deal with, and who constantly creates a dozen back and forths in meetings just to find a middle ground to work with, right? But if you come from the lens that, hey, I want to make sure that this customer experience is as good as the design team wants it to be, but at the same time, I need to hit my check boxes as an info security guy to make sure that this journey does not break any of those info security guidelines that I practice and preach. Then let me try to approach this from that lens from day one, as opposed to shoving my info security philosophy down everybody's throat because that's what industry standard asks for, and completely jeopardizing and ripping apart the experience that has been so thoughtfully crafted by the team that really employs design thinking thoroughly, right? And it boils down to really building and fostering this collaboration together. Because the sooner you're able to start to see middle grounds from day one, the sooner you're actually able to come up with more innovative solutions for things that aren't so crystal clear upfront. And that's how you start really picking up the pace. Otherwise, you can have two different organizations trying to do the exact same thing. One's going to take 6 months to deliver a fully end-to-end amazing solution that's got innovative ideas, and the other one's going to take 2 years to release a up to par or subpar solution, just because they were just constantly at each other's throats, not being able to see each other's point of views and find a middle ground soon enough.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying, it actually reminds me of some past episodes, especially around the topic of design-led organizations. And when I hear you speaking, it almost, to me, seems as if the way that you get universal, to some degree, buy-in when it comes to creating a design-led or a product-led org is one of the ways to do this is through using the framework of design thinking, right? So the design thinking framework permeates the entire organization, so that when anyone who comes onto the team during that life cycle has a sense of what's being done, where they are in the process, what's being focused on as of right now, and ultimately what their roles and responsibilities are to some degree, so that it fosters collective intentionality. What I mean by that is that so that everybody who's kind of together on the team knows where they are in the process and can work cross-functionally and can work together and collaborate faster and quicker by using this framework, design thinking. So it's almost, and tell me if this is taking it a little bit too far, but it's almost like it's a business philosophy. The design thinking is a business philosophy tying together all the different components and elements of the business, so that as the designers are following this process, hopefully from the beginning all the way to the end. But again, as we were saying, that rarely always happens, and sometimes you have to start start and stop, or start from the middle of the process, or skip a phase or something like that. But let's just say hypothetically we're in the perfect world, and you're starting from empathy and you're going all the way down to testing and monitoring the MVP when it becomes live. It's a way of binding together all different kinds of people, and without having all those people understand design thinking and how it operates, you're never going to get that cohesion.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely spot on. It is, calling it a business philosophy and binding people and creating that cohesion across teams is the way I would describe it. In fact, sometimes I even go one step further and call design thinking a way of life, and that should be applied across everything, right? Like even down to
design is everywhere.
Design is everywhere, but even just down to like empathizing with your stakeholders, right? With the folks that you work with, and really trying to understand their point of view. Otherwise, it could just forever be a screaming match between two individuals from two different teams, shouting out their perspectives and why they think they're right, without really properly trying to understand what the other person has to say, right? So for me, empathizing goes beyond just the customer. It's also how we interact and collaborate with colleagues and coworkers, and why it's so crucial to be able to do so if you want to actually hit those 6-month deadlines and produce the best possible thing, right? In agile and project management, there's always this concept of on time and under budget, right? And there is an unsaid given that it also has to be a kick-ass product, right? How the hell do you make sure things are on time, within the budget, and kick-ass at the same time?
If I can jump in here, I want to get your take, because I feel like you're right. I find it too, that a lot of times the quality of the product sometimes gets it doesn't get the time that it deserves in terms of the conversations of what we're focusing on. Why do you think that is? I mean, it might be because, when you're at least it might just be, if you're thinking about bigger organizations and smaller organizations. Bigger organizations, it's hard there's like a credit problem, right? Where like, you're not going to really see, if there's a lot of people working on the project, you're not going to see your hard work really result in something tangible, just because there's so many different pieces of the pie and so many different people who are working on the project, and you can only do a really small thing. And so that why really go for the go above and beyond to try to make sure that the experience of the product is really well crafted? Whereas in a startup, it seems like it's much easier to make an impact based on the work that you do. So that focus of, we're going to try to really make something wonderful and great. You see a lot of times those, revolutionary products come from smaller companies. And I'm guessing that because it's a smaller team, people have more ownership. People, they know that their work, if they go above and beyond, that work is going to make an impact. Yeah. So then you get these great products. Whereas when you have a bigger organization where it's more, the work is more diffuse, you typically don't get as greater. You don't get the revolutionary products like you see that are coming out of startups. So I wonder if team size makes a difference.
No, I think it's not. I don't think team size impacts as much. I think what really is driving the quality and the success stories out of these startups is that there is just better alignment towards that mission and vision. Yes, okay, sure, maybe because it's a smaller team, it's easier to communicate that across. But you can still communicate across your overall vision. And a lot of times this vision statement is, in the most successful companies are experiential visions for the customer, as opposed to financial visions for the company, right? It's that we want to become, a digital bank with a human touch, or we want to become, the company, the go-to
or solve this need or whatever
solve
it
this
is.
need or make education more affordable for students across the globe. It's thinking about how can we bring about an impact or a positive moment in the lives of the customers, as opposed to saying our vision is to become 50 million, hit a $50 million valuation by, so and so date, right?
Right. What they don't, those people who focus on the economics or on the finances, is that the way that you get $50 million, right, is to focus on the experience. That's exactly your ticket into it.
No, and also by doubling down and really hammering in the experience point means that as a developer, yes, my objective as a developer is to ensure my code is built correctly, it's built well, it's built in a modular fashion, yada yada yada, performance and all that sort. But I'm not building this code for those metrics. Yes, I'm measured against that, and I have to make sure it's compliant to that. But I'm building this code because I'm going to get this, I'm going to make sure that this code that goes as part of this massive website is what's going to help make, for example, education affordable for students, right? So my internal motivation is driven by the final experience, even though I'm just a guy building it, bringing it to life, and it's the other team who's done all the thinking on the experience.
It goes back to culture, right? Mm-hmm. Where if you have that experience or, that design thinking culture where you're starting with the customer, and the customer centricity is, diffuse and is, you see it running throughout the entire organization, then that it becomes, in my opinion, much easier for that mission and vision to get articulated across functions and across the organization so that people can come together. I mean, I feel like that is probably one of the hardest things to do, is to make sure that everybody has a common vision, and that goes all the way down to a specific project and all the way up to a whole organization. Mm-hmm. And to make sure that those projects and that organization, so that micro level and macro level, the vision kind of can connect. And it doesn't have to be, I think, perfect, but if the vision of your individual projects and the people working on them, if people understand that vision and the mission, and that somehow connects to the larger, vision and mission of the company, then I think that's a recipe for success. Agreed. Yeah. So, okay. So, we kind of went off there, which a good tangent on design thinking and structuring organizations and making them more experience led. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I like that. It's not product led or design led. It's experience led.
Experience led.
But yeah. So going back maybe to empathy.
Okay, I have a nice way to just pivot off of what we just discussed to bring it back to empathy, and it's that, from my experience, those companies that have this experiential vision are the ones that are able to really use empathy, be it cognitive or emotional, to help the rest of the organization really connect to and believe in what we're trying to do.
100%, of course. I mean, I feel like, and the way that you get, I think, it's partly why I'm right now in my career, I'm thinking about, should I, get away from research, or should I, focus more on product design and this kind of thing? But I really do like the research and it's going to be hard for me to really walk away from that. And the reason why is because I feel like those insights, when it comes to, if you get that research right, and you do it with, high quality, and you take it seriously and you're professional about it, and you as a researcher understand the broader picture of where it's going, that stuff is so much fun. It's so much, and it's so valuable. And there's a interesting, you go out on the blog, the LinkedIn and the blogs, and, listening to podcasts, this kind of thing. You have a lot of people now, because research is kind of growing and it's getting more popular, talking about, hey, from a business point of view, what's the return on investment with research? Why should we have these researchers running around doing their weird ethnographies and, collecting data and being all nerdy. Like, how is like, okay, that's fine. How is that going to help us? But it, to me, the answer is really that if you want to be experience led, and if you believe that the value of your products and services lie within how they solve problems, then you need those researchers. Because without them, you're either doing it yourself, which is dangerous and biased, or you're not doing the research and you're either following what other companies are doing, you're following the leaders, which is no way to solve problems in new ways, or you're solving your own problems, like that you have as like the CEO, for example, has a pet project because he finds something annoying or whatever it could be.
Yeah.
But are we validating that? Or are we being are we looking at evidence? So that evidence, the researchers bring that evidence into the discussion. And I feel like, not to be too grandiose, but that's a way of almost making the process more scientific, more objective. And I feel like we can learn from the hard sciences that, we can get knowledge that way. We can find things that are actually real, that are actually mirroring reality. And it's all about trying to predict the market so that when you have your product and it's gone through the process and it's been researched, you're predicting, it's a theory. You're predicting that this thing is going to get into that, it's going to go into that population and it's going to succeed, which means people are going to want it and people are going to find it useful, right? So there's really, to me, no way of being experience led without having those researchers in your organization trying to learn as much as they can. The struggle sometimes gets with the organization, the fact of making sure that the insights that they're collecting are going to the right places and being consumed the right way and being oriented so that like people aren't wasting their time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I get what you mean. I mean, the way I tend to look at it is that if,
So empathy is the most important part of, I would imagine, what design, the design thinking process and principles, because without it, it's just, I wouldn't say it's waterfall, no, but it's just this old way of doing design. I think it was the way that probably happened when there was mainly just engineers, and engineers were just building for themselves. It was more technology driven, but then you would get this technology built by engineers and they would go out to the customers and they would be like, this, and that's how you get bad products. Yeah. Right. So you either need research, a systematic way of researching product, individuals and empathizing with your population, or you either need that, or you need a genius like a Steve Jobs type. That's the only way to build, I feel like, great products.
Yeah, I mean the way I've kind of gone about justifying and explaining how and why research is needed and so on is. It is, yeah. I mean, and this is sort of answering the statement you made earlier of whether you want to continue in the field of research or should you move to product design. I mean, if you honestly ask me, the way I look at myself is, and I'd like to think of myself as more of a product owner, right? But in order to do that job of a product owner effectively, I feel like I have to be a researcher, right? Because I understand that world of product ownership, having played that role before, but I also understand the value of research and how important it is and how it's being underutilized and undervalued in most organizations. And that if I can come in and do research the way it should be done from a product owner's lens, because I can speak that language and talk that lingo, I can now empathize with my product owner stakeholder and convince them on how valuable research is and get the job done. Right. So
now, you know what I'm going to say now. Yeah. That you're right. Most places I've gone to, research has been ill understood and underutilized and not brought in properly, in my opinion. And just, it's new, I think. So we're trying to figure it out, but partly why it is underutilized and ill understood is, I would argue, partly is because we call it empathy.
Or is it just lack of representation in pop culture?
That's not incorrect, because I think design is not represented in pop culture at all. And we know this. Why do we know this? Because when I go and I talk to my friends and my family about what I do, nobody, they go, what? What is design? Right. There's no pop culture representation. Totally right. On top of that, when you call research empathy, which really isn't, you confuse people. I'm not saying it's the only, there's no way around it. I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying that it's the only reason it can get misinterpreted or misunderstood or not used properly and this kind of thing. It's a really new discipline as well, which is you have a mismatch of a lot of people who are in the discipline too. But you have people who are just qualitative researchers who just do interviews, and you have other people who are. So we're kind of we're working through it, but yeah. I don't think calling it empathy helps. I really don't.
I mean, honestly, I when I have to explain research to people, I call it understanding customers, and empathy is just a simple way to say it, right? The same way you could downplay a finance guy and say all he does is crunch numbers, when that's not really the case.
Studying customers, right?
Yeah, studying customers, understand customers.
What would be wrong with that?
I mean, nothing's wrong with that, but like just I guess it depends on what kind of crowds we're rolling with, right? Which phrase is gonna click better for them. So understanding customers is an empathizing, and you applying and using empathy is just one great way to do it, right? And yeah, I mean, like I think that's what it boils down to, right? Like if people really, if there's a widespread understanding of what we do, even on the most basic level, it would certainly ensure that research would not be misrepresented or underutilized or misunderstood.
Well, it's funny because, like I was saying before, I think the thing that makes human-centered design different than everything that's come before it, and different than typically how businesses operate, is the focus on being evidence-based, is the focus on having, whether you want to call them researchers or not, because maybe even 10, 15 years ago, there weren't really dedicated researchers who were doing it. It was just designers were just doing their own research, right? And so the emphasis on the customers and the population and that understanding as the product is going through changes and iterations and adjustments and adapting it to their opinions in a methodological way, so it becomes much more rigorous, is the defining factor of human-centered design. I think it's what makes it unique, most essential part. And if you're buying into human-centered design principles and research is not a part of it, you're not doing it, period.
Yeah, you've basically just killed off the human part of it if you don't have research.
Yeah. It puts the human in human-centered design, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's another thing, though, that why empathy could be misunderstood is that because when I think you hear empathy, because there's one meaning where it's trying to get an understanding of an individual, is trying to feel what they feel and see what they see, this kind of thing. It doesn't imply research. So what designers might say, one negative aspect, I think, of calling it empathy could be this. Whereas I'm a designer and I'm going to create this experience, let's say. I can empathize, and all I mean by empathize is I can think about, okay, here's my population that I'm going to design for. Instead of doing research, what I can do is I can empathize with them. I can try to put myself in their position, which is what empathy is, cognitive empathy, right? I can cognitively empathize with the person at the sitting at the front desk of my apartment complex. I can empathize with them, okay? I'm imagining that I'm sitting there. I'm imagining that I'm checking people in, all these things. And I can just go, boom. Let's just say I'm designing for them. Let's say there's a system in my front desk. Okay. I'm now cognitively, as a designer, I'm cognitively empathizing with them. Okay. I'm doing it. Okay. And now I'm designing. And you're skipping the whole step of studying and understanding your customers, because you've just checked that box of empathy. And I'm not saying that happens. I don't know how often that happens or not, but I'm sure of it, that it does happen. And when that happens, you have designers who are saying that they're doing human-centered design because they're empathizing with their users, which they are, but they're not researching them.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
and that should be, I think we should avoid, we want to avoid that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a simple flow chart, right? You can do everything you just described. You can cognitively empathize and put yourself in your front desk guy's shoes and then pretend you're him for a day. And then as you're doing certain things, which you're assuming is what he would do based on how you've empathized, you then just kind of pause and ask yourself this one simple question: that do I have any evidence to back this up, to say that, yeah, this is what he's going to do next? And if no, then you go out and you start asking. Right? You start doing the research, you start getting, like, there are assumptions in everything we do, right? Even after you've done the research, there's still going to be assumptions, which is why design thinking is iterative, right? Which
you're
allows
not,
you
yes,
to go
you're
back.
not going to get a complete, I mean, it's why I like thinking about doing just like, how I broke down the 3 different parts of, like, say, the design process. Let's take, design thinking out for a second and say discovery, creation, and monitoring. When you're discovering, you're not going to get it. Like, the map that you're making does not mirror apples to apples the terrain.
Yeah.
It can't. It's a map. It's an abstraction. Right. So you're trying to do is when you're discovering, you're trying to make, in my opinion, you're trying to make a map.
Yeah.
As best you can of that terrain. And the map won't be perfect. It can't be. Maps, even Google Maps aren't perfect, right? They serve a purpose.
Yeah.
They're a tool, right? They're a tool that helps you get around. And without a map, you're screwed if you're trying to get from place A to place B. So it serves its function, but it's not a complete, it's not complete.
Yeah.
And it never will be. And it shouldn't. It shouldn't.
It never will.
Because then you'll be researching until you're dead.
Till kingdom come. Yeah. I mean, but that's the thing, right? Like, if that map has got, everything you put into that map is going to be put based on a certain level of confidence. That I'm pretty sure there's a road here, or I'm pretty sure there's a mountain there, and so on, right? But unless you go and actually look with your own eyes and really understand what the hell's going on, that's when, you're confident. You could either come back and be like, yep, I was right, there's going to be a mountain there, or nope, I'm totally wrong. It's, it's a farm, right? Or something else.
I don't know if you've ever seen those old school maps from like the, 15 or 1600s, where you had map makers trying to make assumptions about what the world looks like. And it's just hilarious because
it's hilarious. Because they have absolutely
not
no
even
clue,
close.
Right?
They have absolutely no clue.
It's
what you need is
and assumptions and gut feeling and all kinds of different things.
The way that you get a better map is you send out your explorers and they come back with evidence. Right? I mean, I could try to empathize what this part of the world looks like. I can try to imagine in my head it could look like this, but until I actually have sketches and data and information from my explorers, then I can make my map and it can actually help people. So
yeah, I mean, I get what you mean, right? Like but the way I look at research is like it's almost like Batman's belt, right? You got so many different things in that belt, but you gotta pick and choose each gadget wisely, right? You can't just throw everything at it, right? And
I mean, that's partly why, just real quick, that's partly why I feel like UX research is not synonymous with interviewing people. And a lot of people do feel like that's the case.
Right. Yeah. It isn't. It's a toolkit. Yeah, exactly. Which again goes back to the point. We're not represented enough in pop culture. There needs to be a movie about a UX researcher.
Movie, or maybe some famous person that is a UX researcher, like I'm trying to think.
We need Christopher Nolan to direct a movie about a UX researcher. That's what we need. Like when the day that happens, all our problems are going to go away. Well,
he's directed one about a physicist, so that's a step in the right direction.
That's a step in the right direction, exactly.
But I'm not sure if any UX researchers are going to be changing the world anytime soon. But you know what? You never know.
You never know.
Yeah. And I think what we do actually, in a very small way, especially if the product that we're working on is something that can impact the safety of somebody, or for example, like a medical database or something, where if it's not done right, lives can be at stake. So like this stuff, I think, does really do it does matter. It's not only just about bottom line and making money, and which it can help with that, which I think can justify our
existence.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a wrap for this episode of UX. If you want to stay up to date with Chris and Mustafa's latest episodes, be sure to subscribe to the show and leave them a review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps other listeners find the podcasts and join in on the conversation. And don't forget to check the line notes to follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn for behind-the-scenes content, updates, access to comment boards, and sneak peeks of upcoming episodes. Thanks for listening to UX, and we'll see you next time for some more insights into the ever-evolving world of user experience.